This session is hosted by World Education Services, a global social enterprise which began its mission-aligned investing journey in 2020 with responsible investing, sustainable investing, and a 4% carve-out for catalytic impact-first investing. Over 3 years, the team and board members moved along a rigorous and thoughtful process to reimagine what stewardship and fiduciary duty means for a mission-driven organization, demonstrate new investment strategies, and explore approaches to align more of its resources with impact. In this session, leaders from WES and its board will discuss their journey to 100% mission-aligned investing, highlighting key milestones and lessons learned, as well as how its work relates to WES total enterprise approaches to drive impact and systems change. This session, like I said before, is brought to you by World Education Services, and its moderator is Smita Das from the organization. Thank you so much, and please give a lovely hand of applause to our moderator and our panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Smita Das, and it's wonderful to be with you. I've been looking forward to this panel for some time. It's been a few years coming. And this is really the first time we're publicly sharing the journey that WES has been on for the last few years, ultimately culminating in a decision last November where we committed 100% of our resources to be invested in a mission-aligned way. And so what we want to do through this, thank you. And so what we want to do with this conversation is really go back in time and start sharing what were the key steps and milestones that we went through as a team, as a board, and how can we bring others along similar journeys so that we can unlock more capital to move in this way. And so just to start, I'm just delighted to be with my esteemed colleagues, Esther Benjamin, CEO and Executive Director of World Education Services. Her stewardship over the last 5 years has really just built the runway for us to be able to move and make these types of big shifts. Sydney Hargrove, the vice chair of the board, but also wears other many hats, including as executive director of the Leaders Trust. And also, of course, Margot Brandenburg, a regular at SOCAP, and she was just honored to have her as an executive member of our investment committee at WES and continues to serve in that role, but also in her day job, senior program officer at Ford, and also trustee for other organizations that have moved along this journey, like the Woodcock Foundation. So really excited to be in conversation with you all. I wanted to start the conversation by setting a bit of 2 comments before I pass it to Esther to continue to set the stage. So the first is that earlier this year, Bridgespan and Capricorn released a report, and they did a study to see how foundations, private foundations, have invested in an impact-aligned way. And they essentially announced in their report that the median foundation allocated just 5% of their investable assets through impact investing. Yet, 92% of the foundations in the survey were identifying as very active in the impact investing ecosystem and were members of organizations like the Global Impact Investing Network and Mission Investors Exchange. So there's that reality. Then there's the reality that we've been living at WES, which is a dynamic social enterprise, mission-driven organization, where we have started with a 4% allocation to impact investing just in 2020, but through a very rigorous and thoughtful journey, we've been able to move with a sense of urgency to allocate more of our capital along with our values and mission, and that led again to this commitment to 100%. So just want to sit with both of those realities that we're in, and how can we, through this conversation, unpack what happened through the case study of WES, but also maybe uncover things that could be translated to other organizations. So with that, I will pass to Esther to just continue to set the stage. Could you just share more about who is WES? What is our social enterprise model?
Great. Thank you, Smitha, and great to join you and Sydney and Margot for this conversation. And Great to be at my very first SOCAP meeting, and grateful for my colleagues who really pushed me to attend and to learn from this remarkable community. So I'm taking it all in. It has been an evolution over the past 5.5 years, and I look over here to my colleague Monica Munn, who's our Chief Social Impact Officer, who's been on the journey with me, and we also have our one other board member, Donna Daniels from Possibility Labs, attending as well. And I've just been surrounded by amazing colleagues and board members and advisors as we've been on this journey. We are also fresh from our 50th anniversary celebration. Not many organizations get to reach that milestone. And that was a powerful moment, a powerful evening for all of us to realize that even 50-year-old organizations that are so long-standing and well-established can innovate and change and continue to be relevant and drive long-term impact. At our celebration on October 16th, there were digital banners everywhere that said, "Anyone can thrive anywhere." And that was another powerful reminder of our mission to ensure that international students and immigrants and refugees should be able to succeed anywhere in the world. Now, as we continue our work with this community, the numbers are powerful. There are 300 million immigrants around the world, people who live in countries other than the country in which they were born. There are 130 million people who are displaced. There are 6 million international students around the world. And this is particularly relevant for me. I have been in all of those categories. I've been the child of international students. I've been an international student myself. I've been displaced by a civil war in Sri Lanka. And finally, an immigrant to the United States. And people are on the move, and these numbers are only going to increase over time. The 130 million who are displaced is particularly concerning for us. Just a few years ago, that number was under 100 million. So we are active in this space and have been active in this space for 50 years, and we are a nonprofit social enterprise. We have a revenue-generating product that continues to grow and expands. We have 500 million people who seek our services annually. And the product generates about $100 million annually. The $100 million in annual revenue that we generate allows us to be financially independent in a way that is so powerful. So every year, we have 500,000 people who seek our services, and they bring us about 650,000 academic qualifications from around the world. And this service has evolved over time, and we have become one of the largest organizations providing this service. So this service is somewhat of a mystery to people, and I'll say a little bit more about what it is. People are coming to the United States and Canada every year. Huge numbers are immigrating, and typically they have anywhere from 1 to 2 academic qualifications. They come to us for a couple of services. We authenticate and validate the qualification. We also examine the qualification from the perspective of the country in which that degree was earned. So we are experts in countries and systems of education and recognition and accreditation systems, and this covers 204 countries and territories around the world. We have also, over time, built relationships around the world with academic institutions, and that network is about 60,000 educational institutions around the world. We are experts in examining about 30,000 different kinds of qualifications, and to be even more precise, we've become experts in converting grade point averages to the US and Canadian system. Did you know that there are 5,600 grade point averages around the world? This is the kind of thing that we maintain updated knowledge of. So we have 50 years of academic credential data in our database that we use every day to do our work, and every day about 2,000 different people are coming to us for these services. So it's a remarkable operation, and we have about 200 people who work on this business. So this is the core product that we have had for all of those years. And about 10 years ago, our team started saying, is this what we should do for the rest of our existence, or should we actually think about other services and other ways in which we can drive impact? So about 10 years ago, the organization started to think about other forms of social impact. And at that point, we were generating enough revenues, covering costs, and having a surplus that could cover these other services. And we began to experiment with programmatic initiatives and policy advocacy and thought leadership initiatives. And so a number of different initiatives were being tested. So at this point, we had this product that was generating revenues, and we had programs, and we had policy and advocacy. And around that time, Monica and I came on board. Sydney was on our board. And we came on board and said, these are fantastic initiatives, and we should solidify them, and we should expand them. And that's what we began to do, and we started to grow our team of people working on these initiatives, and that began a process of evolving our social impact. In 2019, following a board resolution, and this board resolution essentially said that we would use our unrestricted revenues or reserves to fund philanthropic initiatives. So we launched the Wes Miriam Asefa Fund, and Monica was the person who helped launch it. And the board had said we would focus on grant making and impact investing, and we would focus on reserves of about 30 million over 15 years. That was what the board thought we would do, and we began a year-long process, and truth be told, 5 years in, we have exceeded the 30 million. So the 30 million for 15 years, we have now done grant making and impact investing of 30 million to about 180 organizations in just 5 years. So that was remarkable, and we started to really learn what our ecosystem is and the evolution of the organization to really being a full-scale social enterprise was in motion. At that point, we had more reserves, and we began a conversation with the board about what more we could do. And the resources were never seen by our team or the board as resources to be accumulated over time and just held by the organization and invested by the organization. We constantly asked ourselves, why do we have these resources? What are we to do with these resources? And Smitha was on board since 2020 and began to really encourage to think about mission investing of all of our resources. So in 2019, we had a year-long process to think about philanthropy. And in 2023, we had a year-long process to think about mission-aligned investing. And Margot was a part of that. And by November of 2023, our board approved a 100% mission alignment of all of our unrestricted reserves. So that's where we are, and there was absolutely no roadmap for this. No one's done this before. That is a operating NGO that's generating its own resources. So we had to kind of develop this roadmap as we went, and it's been an incredible journey. And as we look at what we have done, what we come back to is, what are these resources for? Is it for us to invest in public markets, or is it meant to reinvest in our community? And we see these resources as belonging to our community, and we see these resources as being regenerative for our community. We're excited to be on this journey, and thanks to everyone on this stage.
Thank you so much, Esther, for setting the foundation. Who is Wes? How did we get to this point as a 50-year-old institution? I think the word that keeps coming back to me and is so resonant is this concept of regeneration. How do you build a regenerative business, social enterprise? And that is the question that is kind of on the investment team's mind. How do we think about a regenerative investment portfolio and strategy? And just want to name that for this conversation. There's a lot of pieces to how we were able to move so quickly. Part of it was certainly the leadership, if I may name, that's on the stage, but also the enabling environment and factors. And so we can start unpacking some of those factors to the extent it's useful to all of you. I would say, Sydney, I would love to bring you into the conversation as vice chair. Last year, we created a mission investing task force. It was just a one-year commitment for the board, so not a full commitment of a new investment committee. So from a governance perspective, just a learning cohort of board members and external advisors to bring together a group to really unpack this question of how do we align more resources in a mission-aligned way. We did not say 100% at the time, we just said more, thinking maybe we would go from 4% to 10% or something else, right? So the question was very much open. So Sydney, I think a lot of organizations that I'm talking to, peers, foundations, family offices, other nonprofit institutions, one of the biggest hurdles to move here is this concept of being a fiduciary of an organization and the narrow definition of what that can mean. And I think your leadership has been so seminal to think about the redefinition of fiduciary duty and stewardship. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Smitha, and thank you, Esther, as well. If you've been anywhere near a nonprofit, a foundation, or a social enterprise, you know the critical role that a board can play either in allowing the reimagination of work and advancement of it, and or squashing it, right? And so I think, you know, as I think about it now and as I look over the years on the board, there were a few, I think, key factors that set the stage, planted the seeds for us to reimagine our responsibility. One of them was basically the culture and composition of the board, right? During that period early on, 2018, prior to creating the Miriam Asefa Fund, the board went through a pretty significant change where the majority of the board members over a 2-year period, I believe, left or moved off, not left. They rotated off, and a significant new cohort of board members came on board. Now, the board members that left were excellent. They were fantastic. They were leaders in the field. But I think from what I can remember, it was really just about, like, if we're going to reimagine this direction, who else do we need, right? And so what came together was a board that was comprised of leaders in global higher ed, corporate and social innovation, entrepreneurship, and what I think is even more critically important, board members who had lived experience as immigrants and or children of immigrants. And that all together really caused this atmosphere to challenge us forward, right? Our meetings were not rubber stamp meetings at all. We were in deep discussion about what did it mean to actually embrace the urgency of the moment? What did it mean to actually dream big, but thoughtfully take action, right? And what does it mean, critically important, what does it mean to commit to rigorously learning as we go? I remember learning being such a central topic of a lot of our sessions. And what that really enables us to do is, this is one factor, is really then to start looking at, all right, if we are compelled, then what must we reimagine, including that fiduciary responsibility. The second thing, and I won't say a whole lot about it because Esther did mention it, but this idea of having increasing net assets, right? And it wasn't so much that the net assets were there and there was an opportunity. There was always deep dialogue about for what. Like what is this opportunity to actually maximize what we're experiencing for impact? And there was each board meeting, I remember, there was quite a bit of discussion around that as well. The next piece, which as a fun fact, as a former engineer, which I think was incredibly important, was this atmosphere of experimentation and evidence, right? Because of the Miriam Sefa Fund, because of certainly Monica's leadership at the time, we actually were able to not only use that fund to make catalytic investments, but also to really experiment with new ways of doing it. And that experimentation introduced the idea of what an impact investment even was to a board that for the most part didn't know anything about it, right? And so, but it offers us an opportunity to learn, right? To actually learn by doing, learn by experimentation. Which I think is critically important for transformative impact. It's not about getting it all right at once. It's about having a bias toward action and iteration and learning and then moving forward from there. The fourth thing was this growing concern and curiosity about our investment approach, right? Yes, there are these net assets that we have available to us, but how do we make sure that they're not working against us? How do we make sure that the way they're invested, they're not actually working actively against the mission of the organization through the investment approach, which was critically important as well. And then along with that, a real curiosity about, well, if there's another way, how do we do that? Like, what is that? What is the way to be use these flexible, and really, quite frankly, to use the flexibility of a social enterprise structure, an organization that's not a typical nonprofit, a conventional nonprofit, that's not an endowed foundation where this, the focus is on perpetuity. Like, what is this opportunity now to look differently toward what it meant to maximize the impact of those investments? And then the fifth thing that I'll say, and this is one that if you grab me after, before, 5 weeks from now, 2 years from now, I'll keep saying it. We were a board that was willing to redefine the word risk. The idea of risk evolved from being purely a financial conversation to this conversation about what is the risk of not maximizing these funds? What is the risk of not creating absolute maximum opportunity for the immigrants, refugees, and students that we seek to support? And those 5 things together really create an environment, an ecosystem, an opportunity where, again, and I've been on several boards over time, it was a different board experience. Our board meetings was a different experience. The level of engagement, dialogue, pushback, learning was that environment created the foundation and the seeds to really reimagine the fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah, we did put the board to work. We had essentially monthly board meetings over the span of 2023, and we called them working sessions, right? We didn't call them board meetings where we were reading out, and we were so lucky to have Vivian Westfuller working with us hand in hand through this process, and now excitingly working with us on the asset management side of how we actually steward our resources, particularly the public markets positions in a mission-aligned way. But bringing them in, being able to bring in additional voices from the field who have done this and walked the walk. What can we learn from them, and then what do we need to, Frankenstein for what WES is? So I will say that question came up a lot with the board around people were so excited to say, okay, but what could this look like for WES? And that question kept coming back, and sometimes we had to pull people back saying, let's really talk about the why before we get to the what. But Margot, I would love to bring you in to just say, you've seen many organizations move along the curve to move more of their assets to be aligned with mission. I'm curious what has been effective for you in those journeys, and particularly you've been part of course, the WES journey. What did you see work well to de-risk some of the work around moving more money in this way?
Thank you, Smitha. Sorry, I've been hanging on each of your words. I forgot to check if my own mic had been turned on. Hi, everybody. First of all, I just think WES is the coolest organization. I was so flattered when you all invited me to be part of your process, and still consider myself so lucky to have had a front seat at one pivotal stage in the arc of a long-standing organization. So anyway, just feel eternally grateful. But I think different organizations have different opportunities and constraints. Like Sydney, you mentioned the kind of model of a 20th century foundation, which, to be clear, is my day job at the Ford Foundation. And I think there's a lot of value that those institutions have and will continue to have. We have a perpetuity mandate. There's no living donor. All of us are temporary stewards of these resources, whether we're staff or board or what have you. The team I sit on is trying to sort of modernize that 20th century notion of philanthropy by taking part of our endowment and intentionally looking for what we call market rate impact investment opportunities to advance our social justice mission. And then on the program side, making catalytic investments and grants to help build the field. But if I'm honest, we are constrained, right? It's just the reality that we live in. WES has different constraints. You serve 500,000 customers a year. You need to invest in R&D, right? The world shifts, so it's not as though WES can sit back on its laurels either. So there's still real constraints and concerns. They just look different. And so I think that sort of diagnosis of, who am I as an institution? What can I do? What do I need to be cognizant of is going to be really different, even within the philanthropy sector, the social enterprise sector, and is a really kind of important, maybe obvious first step. I guess second thing I would say, Cindy, to your point is don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And I really appreciate that you all started with a 4% experimental portfolio. You didn't say, well, if we're not all in, it's not worth doing. That is setting up, something that's destined to fail. And so really taking whatever the next most meaningful step is feels the most important thing, right? And so, we ask ourselves that a lot as we contemplate things at Ford and even at Woodcock, a foundation where I'm a trustee. I think we're at 92 or 94% of aligning our assets with our mission, and that last few percent is hard, but that doesn't stop us from just every day trying to do a little bit more. I think being really clear about our own organizational strengths and capabilities. It's not just Wes, but from my vantage point at Ford, I see an increasing number of social enterprises want to sort of get involved with impact investing, either as a recipient or as a source of capital. But if there's no one on staff that can articulate the difference between debt and equity, that's maybe not an appropriate starting point, right? Unless and until you can either hire or outsource the capabilities that are needed, right? But I think being really clear-eyed about the capabilities that exist within the organization, and then being able and willing to hire, like you mentioned, Vivian West Fuller, engaging outside help that does have this expertise, and then complementing, the existing capabilities that you sort of start the journey with. And then the last thing, Smith, to echo what you said, it's leadership, right? It's leadership and moral courage that the board and the staff of WES have. I think what we've done at Ford was possible in large part because the Heron Foundation 20 years earlier had the leadership and the moral courage to imagine a different way of organizing philanthropic resources. And I'm a public policy person, so that expands the Overton window if we're not comfortable with touchy-feely concepts, right? But that it expands what's possible. And so then it allows other organizations who maybe don't have such enlightened board members to take a meaningful step forward and still know that there's others that are ahead of them. They don't have to be all the way out there, right? And so we need leadership to kind of make this more possible for everyone else that's managing different risk appetites, frankly, different constraints, different levels of scrutiny, and just other considerations. So I feel like y'all have demonstrated that in spades, and I just think it's a huge service to the sector more broadly.
If I could jump in, Smitha, what I have learned on this journey is the importance of having the kind of board that we have with people like Sydney who've been with us from day one as we have really expanded as a social enterprise, having people like Donna who have the Heron Foundation experience and now Possibility Labs, having Margot as an advisor. But then it really came down to who's going to work on this internally, as you said, Margot. And Smitha coming on board, working with Monica, getting this going, focusing on impact investing initially, and then expanding the mandate of this team, expanding the team that that Smitha had to work with. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you see the team taking the next steps forward, stepping out of your moderator role a bit, and talking about what comes next as we go forward. Smitha.
Always reinventing, Esther. Always pushing the boundary.
Thank you. I very much appreciate it. And as you can tell, for those who are investment professionals, my job is quite easy because of the folks on this stage. So the enabling environment is key. So I will say around the how are we going to move the money? We made a commitment to moving our capital to be mission aligned by 2030. It is ingrained in our enshrined in our investment policy statement. That was actually the forcing function for these conversations with the board. We used that as a tool to make some decisions and put some guardrails on paper of how we will be aligning our capital. That is actually on the website, and I've seen my colleague Jessica, thankfully, has put some postcards on your tables where the QR code. Feel free to go to our website and see the investment policy statement. You can also contact our team there. We have also an open call for ideas. If you're an entrepreneur or fund manager, we are always looking at that open call to see more opportunities. To your question, Esther, around the how, I think a lot of what we've been looking at across the team is how do we build the right foundation for this work so it is enduring beyond any of us at WES for the next 50 years. And so the question around how do we build the right governance, how do we build the right people, internal, external processes, and also technology to essentially set us up well for moving our capital in a thoughtful way to get to that 2030 goal. I'd say on the governance part, we evolved the Mission Investing Task Force to now just an investment committee. We called it just investment committee. We call it just an investment policy statement. We dropped the mission just because all of our investments are mission investments now, so we don't need the qualifier. We're not a different team. There's not a mission investing team and an endowment team. There's just less investments, and everything is values aligned. So we had a lot of debates about whether we need to keep that name or not, and what we should do for the field, but we decided simplicity was and the world doesn't need another a MIPS, which was what we were working with. The mission investing policy statement, we scratched that. So governance was key, right? So how do we have this as an enduring piece? Donna Daniels, who's in the audience, right, bringing her onto our board. We're really thinking about the reinvention of the board and governance approach, bringing in external individuals, but also holding ourselves accountable to our investee partners. I see several in the room: Black Star Stability, APIS and Heritage, Project Equity. And so just thinking about also in the IPS, you'll see that we have different roles and responsibilities, as most IPSs do, for different stakeholders. We named investee partners and community partners there. So just kind of thinking about that mutual accountability. On the process and technology front, people, right, we're building those building blocks, and next year we'll be starting to ramp up some of our investments. But Cindy, please jump in.
Excellent. Yeah. No, actually, I was just, the one thing that I thought about as you were talking is just like this unstated commitment to evolving, right? That everything that you just said, I think all the comments on the stage was, I think we kind of know that next year we're not going to be at the exact same place that we are this year, or 3 years from now, we have no idea totally. I mean, we have an idea of direction, but there's this idea of being okay with evolving, and that evolution is ongoing, that it's continuous. It's not like we're done, right? At 100%, okay, we're done. Like, no, like what else does that mean?
I usually know where we're going based on the questions my colleagues start to ask me, so they start to push me with questions, and it's a process for me, but I usually don't know where we're going to end up 24 months from now.
That's right.
But I start to get questions from people like Smitha, so many of my other colleagues, and you know, sometimes for me it's unlearning. I'm a former chief financial officer, so I didn't know how this was all going to work, and it was really leaning on and learning from my colleagues. So while I don't know where we're going to be in October of 2025, I have a sense that there are certain things that are going to change based on the questions that are being raised by my team. One of the things that the team is asking is, so now we are in the United States, we're in Canada, and we now have an entity in India. We're incorporated in India. We've got 250 people in the US, 150 in Canada, and we've got about 65 to 100 people at any given point in time in India. So the team's saying, so what does this mean for our evolving social enterprise, Esther? And I don't have the answer to that, but that openness of the board and all of us on the leadership, and the openness for colleagues to push us and present ideas has been key to the continued evolution of this remarkable social enterprise.
Maybe just to add one point, as someone who was coming in from the outside, I think you did a really good job of running a tight process. And I mean, you can't go faster than the speed of trust, right? So it really helps that there was this trust among the board and with the leadership and staff. But once that trust was there, moving through some really intentional milestones, that are informed by other experiences and expertise, but you can admire the problem or sort of endlessly debate some of these questions and not necessarily ever come to resolution. And at a certain point, just saying, okay, we're gonna finalize our IPS now. We all have to have a consensus perspective on what's gonna go in it, because by next Tuesday, it will be done. And you know, it's really important. It keeps energy up, right? It prevents a process from sort of languishing to the point where everyone forgets why it is that the process started in the first place. And it's maybe like a banal point, but I really think it matters, and it's hard to do, and you guys did it really well.
I think there's a sense of urgency, right? With lived experience, we have firsthand knowledge of what it feels like to face barriers and to not be able to access opportunities. So when in 2019 we were clear that we're going to do a first round of grants, you know, it's hard to postpone that or delay that. We just need to do it. And it's hard not to move forward with finalizing the new and improved IPS, because Smitha had a pipeline of 500 opportunities that she had looked at. So there's a sense of urgency that we feel because of the lived experience and really an understanding of the challenges that the members of our community are facing.
One of the other things that comes to mind, I don't know exactly how to say this, but you know, we're here talking about mission investing, right? And this kind of process that we went through to get to this place. But our conversations at the board level aren't about a tool, right? It's the tool. It's the mission invest. It's really about the immigrants, the refugees, the students. It's really about a question of what does it mean to have a philanthropy that shares power and actually stands in solidarity with those who are seeking the support. And so there's this mix of kind of the nerdy conversation, and there's the mix of a real mission conversation happening at the board level and being brought on, quite frankly, by the team, right? And so that's, I want to make sure I put that in there, because it can just be an intellectual exercise if you let it be, but it's really not, right, for us. It's like it's really about that ultimate impact, and really is defining what that means.
Yeah, at West, we often think about our impact in two key dimensions: enabling individuals and driving systems change. And so you can see how through our investments, through our philanthropy, grants, but also policy and products, we're able to really unlock all of these different levers for impact. And I think more and more as we look at the next 10 years and next 50 years, there's a question around how do we have increased coordination across those tools to really drive that systems change and mission alignment. So more to come. I think that's a question that Esther is getting from some of our team, is how do we have better coordination and overlap across those tools, right? I think oftentimes in the field of philanthropy and investing, you often see very siloed organizations around the PRI team or catalytic team doing this, and the mission investing market rate investors doing this, and grant making over there doing something else, right? And I think different organizations have different organizational models. I think we're small and mighty, so because we're small, we can kind of coordinate and build relationships with one another. And through, for example, our investment themes, those themes, impact themes, are exactly the same as our philanthropy impact themes. And they have different flavors for the grant-making colleagues that I have than the investment work that we do, but at least the overall North Star for impact is the same. And that really helps us think a bit more fluidly across those tools. To your point, Sydney, it's kind of what is the right tool for purpose for this organization? Is it grants? Is it debt, equity? Is it a mix? Right. And we really try to think about that blended approach to our investments, particularly in the catalytic strategy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Esther?
Yeah, back in 2020, while we were launching and getting the fund underway, we had a 5-year strategic plan that we introduced, and that also framed the work that we do so well, and Smitha referenced it, and we had sort of 5 pillars in that plan, and it included enabling individuals, driving systems change, staying ahead of the curve, investing in our people and leading as a social enterprise. And that really did help guide the way. And that plan actually goes through the end of next year, but we've already taken on and completed a 10-year strategy definition process, and our team has been hard at work, and this 10-year strategy is about the direction for the organization for the next 10 years and the bets we will make. And this will further inform our programs and policy and philanthropy, as well as our investment program as well. So we never quite take a break, do we? We just, we get ahead of something ending so that we can have a clear sense of where we need to go, and just remarkable colleagues who guide the way in so many ways.
I'll just take a break before I pass to Margot. It sounded like you wanted to jump in, but just a note for those who have questions, please write them down. I believe someone will be collecting them, and we're happy to answer some questions in a minute.
This is going to sound like a total Debbie Downer comment, and I'm like not, or I don't like to think of myself as that person, but just to say, you all do that really well, and not everyone can do that. Like for some organizations, just putting scaffolding underneath commitments and like refining the execution might be enough for a while, or and that's right. I feel like I don't want to be the person that's like, do less, but occasionally that is what I find myself thinking, like just do the thing well before you move on to the next thing. You all have a superhuman team such that you can actually start your plan before the last plan ended, but I think that goes back to like, you have the right people, you have the right arrangements, you have the right board, like you can do it and do it well.
Yeah.
And I just offer that for those of us who might be in slightly different organizational circumstances.
Absolutely. The world changed so much in the past few years that for mobility, for migration, for international education, that we couldn't afford to wait. We needed to examine the dynamism that we faced and update the vision for the future. And so we are ambitious and we move forward aggressively, but there is a reality that things change so much that we can't afford to wait to develop a new strategy, because we will be behind the learning curve. So there's a reality that pushes us forward as well, Margot. But you're right. Not every organization can move at this pace.
I see the questions making their way up. But maybe before we ask that question, I'll just ask for one reflection from you all. For organizations that are interested in taking the next step in wherever they are in the journey, what is one piece of advice or guidance you would take, reflecting on your experience at West or even beyond?
Oh, I can start. I'm here representing the board, and I think, to Margot's point just now, not all organizations in any given moment in time are structured to do certain things, right? And their governance structure may not be structured to do certain things. But my one reflection would be that it's the opportunity of a direction, a transformative direction, is kind of tied to the ability to also have that evolution at the board level over time.
I'll just add, I think there is something for everyone, or almost everyone, in this space at this moment in time. And so, we have grantees at Ford that want to align their assets with their mission, but they really are worried about managing even their next year's, or being able to raise their next year's budget, right? So investing in really illiquid long-term vehicles is probably not the best approach, but they can take their cash deposits and move them to a CDFI where they're federally guaranteed, right? So there is such a range of options, particularly now for all kinds of different organizations and risk appetites and liquidity needs, that it would surprise me that there isn't something meaningful that each and every one of us can do and do soon.
I think I've already mentioned, but having the right people involved as part of your team and the board, all of us have said that. So I will go to another aspect of our planning always, and that's to be in conversation with the community and individuals that we serve. And as we thought about our 10-year plan, I really kind of insisted that we not start doing any of the work without consulting with immigrants, refugees, and international students very closely. So there was an extensive effort by our strategy planning team to have those consultations and to really ground our thinking and our work in those conversations. And that was essential. And the board even said, you know, all of us on the board have lived experience. But I remember that board meeting where you all said, we have lived experience, but we don't have recent lived experience. And so I remember that always, and those consultations are so important for grounding everything that we do.
We have a plethora of questions, so thank you all. I see two here that are related. One kind of theme that's coming up for the audience is just around for nonprofits that have restricted reserves. Is there any ability to do mission-aligned investing there? Because we have the benefit of unrestricted reserves, right? We have, WES has not raised philanthropy or government dollars to fund our operations over the last 50 years. We've been fully self-funded. And so to that point, is there a role for that?
Yes, there is. And I'll put on a different hat, which is a longtime board member of a community development credit union in Brooklyn, which is a CDFI and a credit union. And historically, CDFIs have been awash in deposits, is to overstate it, but have had a harder time raising equity or net assets in the case of a credit union. But in these past few years, I think in particular since Silicon Valley Bank and First Republic and banks have failed, and there's sort of like a flight to safety, and everyone wants to move their money to a very large money center bank, CDFIs and MDIs and local financial institutions really lack for deposits. And many of them have been able to receive CDFI fund grants and other sources of equity, but can't raise deposit capital. And so an organization that has operating reserves, can make a big contribution by investing in an affinity or geographically proximate CDFI without giving up anything, really. Like, the rates are typically competitive, it's federally insured, like there's some transaction cost in shifting accounts, I won't lie, but past that, there's really not much you have to give up. So yes, I think there are options, and I think they're pretty easy to pursue, actually.
Another question that's coming up, I'm seeing across another two of these, is around the pushback we may have gotten from the board, which we did, around the hesitation about, or will we lose financial return? What is the risk to our investment portfolio and target returns? Again, to Margot's earlier points, we still have to sustain the business, right? So for WES, I think a unique aspect of how we thought about our investment approach was really solving for liquidity needs for the company. What if in a few years there's some big policy changes or shifts in our business, which could happen, where the revenues dry up? And then we actually do need to tap into the unrestricted reserves to cover our costs and also social impact activities. And so that question of liquidity was, I think, very front of mind for us at WES. But there were also very important questions that board members and team shared around the potential risk. So I'm seeing some questions here about, did financial advisors push back that this wasn't a good idea? How did we think about the financial return risk and de-risk it, to Sydney's point?
There were so many days when I worried about this and said, what if we need to invest in this or that? And we had invested significant resources in our major digital transformation initiative for the business. And I thought about, would we need a similar investment like that? And my colleagues, Smitha and Monica, would often say, well, until that moment, the resources need to sit somewhere. And, where do we want it to sit? And I think I asked that question like 5 different times in different ways. And that was my own nervousness about, what if we need this? And I really appreciated being able to just unlearn my own concerns and risks and fears about this. And I think it was a process for me as well. And I think the board asked less of that, but we did have board members who said, we want you all to have unlimited resources going into the future. And to certain 1 or 2 board members, it meant investing all of the resources to make as much money as possible so that Wes would have really unlimited resources into the future. But there were plenty of other board members who said, actually, it's about impact. And there was a lot of back and forth with the board, and that was important. And so, it's important to remember that when a board seat opens up, you have to be really thoughtful and intentional about the voices you add to that table.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was always a healthy, and still is, a healthy tension. And I think part of it, again, having this learning commitment meant that we could challenge each other to learn, right? Those who understood the impact side more so could challenge the others, and those who really wanted to take that kind of financial kind of perspective about the protection, we challenged each other, and we continue to do that. And so it's never just about like just doing it one way or the other. It's really, but every single time, every single conversation, the final part is about impact. It always, and we'll weave back and forth, but at the end of the day, we'll come back and we'll answer questions from that perspective. And that environment is what has been helpful to do it.
I'll add a couple additional thoughts to that question, which is a really important one. I think part of the choreography that sometimes went into the task force meetings was around who was saying what, and not staff sharing the data necessarily around, this is the investment returns of private foundations that have moved more money to investments. This is how the returns look like for more mission-aligned investing across, but actually bringing in an external investment advisor, Vivian West Fuller, to say that as kind of an external third party, having our CFO say certain things to the board rather than me, right? And so I think we were really thoughtful about how we did that. And we had many peers to look at who, right? So this is not new. We don't need to start from scratch. We don't need to be first. We can look at Ford. We can look at Heron. We can look at Nathan Cummings. There's so many organizations out there who have done this work. And so we're on their...
But not nonprofits.
Operating social, right. Again, we had to fit it for Wes, and so that's the new piece. But at least from the data set, there was some data to look at, and actually making the case that this can actually lead to better portfolios and portfolio construction. So I'm seeing the sign to wrap up, and so I think with that, I may just leave you with one comment, which is something that we said at monthly board meetings last year, which is all investments have an impact. So the question really to all of us is, what impact do we want to have? And hopefully we can work with you to define that for Wes even further.